Lovely to have you with us, Amanda, and thank you everyone else for joining us for what should be a very interesting webinar again. We will move on to speakers in a short few minutes, but before we get into the meat of the meeting, can you please make sure you're muted if you're not already? If you're able to change your display name to say who you are and what organisation you represent, then that would be great. The webinar is being recorded, and we do make all past webinars available through our YouTube channel and sometimes use extracts of them in publicity and other materials. So please be aware of that. There is, as you'll probably know by now on Zoom, a chat box. Please do use that to post questions and comments as we go through the discussions, and we will try and pick up some of those as we get towards the end of the meeting. My name is Adrian Sell. I am Chief Executive of Oxfordshire Community Foundation. I am very bravely going to be sharing a link to a discrete portion of my calendar, which I've been trialing with a few people recently, but it basically means that if you click on the link, you can select a half-hour slot to say hello to me and meet with me. If you think you want to say hello, bring to my attention the organisation you represent or an issue you're concerned about, then I wanted to try and make some time available for people I don't bump into at meetings on a regular basis. So I think someone's going to post that link in the chat, so please do make use of that. And in case you're worried about my diary, I've limited it to certain days and hours, so it's not going to flood my diary. But if there is massive demand, then we'll have to think about how to manage it. So today's webinar is obviously looking at digital exclusion and how we bridge the digital divide to try and help everyone to get online to do the things they need to do. It is an issue that's come to the fore through the pandemic, but was one that was pre-existing, and I'm not going to say too much about it because we've got some very good speakers coming up. What I would like to talk about is a quick update on the Community Resilience Fund, which we launched just over a year ago, just before the first pandemic. We are, of course, 1 year and 1 day, or is it 2 days now, on from the first lockdown being announced. And I'm really proud to say that we have now given out from OCF over £1 million to local community groups and organisations. And I think that's something like over 150 organisations who have been supported, mostly frontline organisations doing the critical work to support children and families, to support older people, to support people at financial disadvantage or exclusion through what's been an incredibly challenging year. And I just think it's another point in time where we need to say thank you hugely to all of the community groups and people who've done so much of this important work. And thank you to the philanthropists and donors who have contributed over 40% of that money to OCF to help us fund. Most notably recently in the lockdown 3, when that was announced, we had a funding round that was open for under a week because of massive demand. We managed to attract over about £100,000 of additional donations in to support those proposals, which is just testament to the generosity of spirit that is out there in the community at the moment, and was wonderful to see. Moving into the digital domain through the pandemic response, we know that there's been a huge amount of digital interest all throughout the pandemic and the response. In the initial phase, we were helping organisations like Riverside Counselling to run training courses online for their therapists, to provide laptops for ACT so that they could continue to support homeless people remotely, and providing Zoom licenses for organisations like Didcot Train so that they could connect with their young people and continue to provide support to them in some way. As it moved on, we've seen huge impacts on education and people needing digital connectivity for social contact increasingly. So people like Bicester Good Neighbours scheme have had funding to support getting older people online to engage in social contact. The Syrian community in Oxfordshire have been buying Chromebooks to help deliver support and training to their communities. And numerous schools have, through their PTAs and friends associations, have applied for and got funding for laptops and Chromebooks and other IT equipment. We're now looking more to the future and have been, as many of you know, thinking about this for some time. And whilst the kind of short-term immediate responses of us and very many other people have been hugely helpful, we know there's a huge long-term issue and long-term needs that need to be thought about in a long-term sustainable way. And to that end, we've launched a project called Getting Oxfordshire Online, which kind of forms the heart of today's webinar. And Olwen and some other people will be talking more about that in due course. One important part of Getting Oxfordshire Online, as you can imagine, being Oxfordshire Community Foundation, is what the community can do to support people to get online. And we know there's been a huge upsurge through the pandemic of Good Neighbours schemes and other activities to help people with guest Wi-Fi services, through refurbishment of laptops, through other schemes to support people in your local area. We've been working with Oxfordshire All-In to try and map all this activity. So if you know of refurbishment and distribution services that are going on at community level, please do log on to Oxfordshire All-In and update that data and provide that information so that people can go there and work out how they can most easily and locally donate kit if they've got kit they want to pass on. I am going to pause there and introduce our first speaker. Now, in Oxfordshire, we're obviously very lucky in many ways, and one of the ways in which we're lucky is we are host to an organisation called Nominet, who some of you will have heard of, but some of you won't. But they are effectively the domain name registration organisation for the UK, and so to have them housed in Oxfordshire is actually quite an advantage for us in terms of our digital thinking and strategy. Chris Ashworth is Head of Public Benefit, and I will hand over to him to give us an introduction to the broader issues around digital inclusion. Thank you.
Thanks, Adrian. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Good, I've seen thumbs up. Great. Firstly, thanks for having me. Speaking at events like this is a real honour when it's a subject you're passionate about, and it's slightly less nerve-wracking when you can do it in your business pyjamas behind a laptop. Adrian, Olwen and I reconnected last summer on digital exclusion and the digital divide, and it's an area that I've been focused on for a number of years in my role, which is designing social impact programmes for Nominet. As Adrian mentioned, for those of you who don't know Nominet, you probably know us for running either .co.uk or our illustrious sponsorship of the training tops for the Summertown Stars Jayhawks under-12s girls team. I want to start with a quick story about a chap called Tony. Tony is a widower and a retired builder in Yorkshire. Late last February, a year ago, he had a triple heart bypass. Otherwise, he's as strong as an ox and a straightforward and down-to-earth guy as kind of Geoffrey Boycott. In April, he stood on his doorstep in receipt of something I was working on, an emergency campaign nationally. As a local community group handed him a tablet and a SIM card, and he cried. It was tears of relief that after 6 weeks in the most isolating for him and terrifying personal circumstances that he'd experienced, shielding would become a little bit more bearable for him. Tony at that moment, and I hope for a long time since, felt digital technology had kind of saved him and come to his rescue. Just before I dive into digital exclusion specifically, I wanted to step back and kind of frame this issue a little bit wider and talk about how digital technology and social issues have kind of interwoven over the last few years. I've worked on social issues for most of my sort of adult professional life in NGOs, charities and voluntary organisations. I'm not particularly fascinated by technology at all. And weirdly, I think remaining neutral but aware of it, I think is really important. I'm more interested in how it's interrupted, transformed, disrupted and recast social issues. How a contemporary tool like a mobile phone has swept through standing social issues that have remained wicked problems for much of our lifetime. So poverty, inequality, access to basic social services, isolation, mental health and well-being, human rights, safety. Nothing has been untouched by this technology, and it's only really inhabited our lives for the last 13 years probably. But the distortions have been profound. It's created marvellous new opportunities. I worked for some time at Oxfam, and we've seen how it's created drones that can now fly emergency blood supply to some of the most remote parts of East Africa in less than 90 minutes. We've seen how campaigns can mobilise in hours and days to challenge oppression. We've seen oppressors who can equally mobilise in hours and days to challenge activists. It's created overwhelming issues of harm, particularly for those who are already vulnerable offline, and it's made people safer in circumstances we haven't before thought possible. What 3 Words, an organisation that was supported by Nominet Trust a few years ago, has given the world a larger postcode, and now, for instance, is fully integrated with the air ambulance services. So if we're here today to talk about digital exclusion and digital inequality in our area, I'm down in Abingdon, then actually we're here to talk about exclusion and inequality in our region, then examine all the different positive and negative ways in which digital has impacted on those issues, the ways in which it's contorted those issues and at what pace, then whether digital technology has created new inequalities and new exclusions, and whether the pandemic has made any of those changes worse or better. So if you've got a few moments, I wanted to share some perspectives from working on this issue for a number of years, but I kind of, as Adrian and Olwen know, standing up an emergency response in the last 12 months that's felt like 10 years. Firstly, to you, if you've been acting on the issue for a while or exploring our collective response moving forward across Oxfordshire, and you don't have a technology background, good, you have exactly the right skills and experience that's needed. If upwards of 30,000 families are left behind in a region that's increasingly digital by default, like the rest of the UK, then it's actually your relationships that count the most. By far and away the most critical aspect of any digital inclusion programme that I've ever been involved with is trusted relationships. Knowledge, understanding, access and empathy to the people who need the support the most is the key. Secondly, understanding and tackling digital exclusion for me is made up of 4 pillars. These are devices, connectivity, support and skills. And maybe many people, you could see the skills and support as one in the same pillar. There are more pillars, so there is digital resilience, there's safety, there's confidence and motivation, but they all come through as a second order important consequence of those first 4. Thirdly, I wanted to look at each of those areas in particular. So devices, connectivity and support and skills. If a person is missing just one of these pillars, I would say they're digitally excluded. Each one has distinct characteristics. So I've just wanted to examine those in brief. Firstly, devices. If you don't have a device or the right device, then you will of course struggle to access essential online services. In simple terms, during the pandemic, there were not enough machines. Demand exceeded supply during the pandemic. Even schemes that were fundraising successfully for new devices could not fully source them because the families that could afford them suddenly needed multiple machines in the same household. This is where there's been a huge movement and acceptance to turn to reuse and refurbishment. And it's important to remember that that type of approach never really existed before the pandemic at scale. And I'm really passionate about the sustainable, equitable, cost-effective solution on that issue. The second one is connectivity. This is the thorniest and wickedest issue of the 4. Data poverty was an issue of disadvantage before the pandemic. During the pandemic, it was an issue of safety. What I found really devastating, I suppose, during lockdown is that the very services that could protect the most vulnerable from the virus by moving online were not available. So we'll never know how many vulnerable people contracted COVID because they had to visit the GP surgery in person, the pharmacy in person, or the supermarket in person instead of online. Device and data poverty were key components of forcing people out of shielding into the petri dishes of where the virus was most prevalent, and we could have protected them more if we'd have been able to stand up more devices and more connectivity at the time. A little more on data poverty. This isn't really like device poverty, it's much more fluid. You can be in data poverty like you can be in food poverty. You can be okay for half the week and without for the rest. Mobile data should be a commodity, but actually it's become an insecurity. But we don't yet have data banks like we have food banks. Digital exclusion existed well before the pandemic, of course, where most of the attention was over the years was on skills and motivation. There was a clear correlation between social exclusion and digital exclusion, between isolation age and vulnerability. So whilst 1 million families, which you might have seen through the BBC work and everything else with the Give a Laptop appeal, were without a device and connectivity, there's still 11.9 million people without basic digital skills. So even with the hardware and the gigabytes, the opportunities and the essential services remain behind an invisible wall or a screen. Finally, on support, I expect this is one of the areas, as it's been the most obvious parallel with all kind of social interventions that exist, and for so many of you work in this space. For all the coordination at a local or national level, support to be digitally included, to motivate somebody, to support, to inspire, to build skills, always comes from a trusted relationship. There are many ways to coalesce and build a digital inclusion programme across the country, lots of ways to be incredibly successful, but only if people are put at the heart of it. And that relationship between the service user and their trusted peer, their support worker, their social worker, their teacher, their mentor, is really put at the centre of the programme. So to round off, a lot has changed in the digital inclusion community of practice since the pandemic, and it's an exciting space to now be involved in because of all the positive changes, the tools and collaborations emerging, the attention that's been drawn to it to see it as a significant issue. Trying to stay on top of them is a tall order, but I wanted to share just a few elements that I'm excited about coming up over the next months and the next year. So it's a rather grand title, but the Data Poverty Lab, which is going to be led by Good Things Foundation. If you haven't heard of them, they are a charity that also run the online centre network. I know our friends at Aspire are connected with them. We've underwritten the Data Poverty Lab, and it will be a collective opportunity to explore and incubate new ideas that can tackle the data issue. So it will explore things like data gifting and data sharing from one person to another, with the telecoms companies, zero rating, which means charges are removed from essential services, something that we did with the NHS during the first wave, and as well as community Wi-Fi and social tariffs. Another one is a bit of a shameless plug for the Reboot website, and I think we're sharing the URL there. This is something we built at the end of summer. Adrian was a real help in the development of that. It's an interactive guide for regions, local communities, charities and schools to develop their own end-to-end digital inclusion programme. So it's a full checklist, it's a full instruction manual, and it's there and being built for people regardless of their budget, regardless of their IT skills and prior experience. The corporate IT restoration campaign, I'm hoping you'll see this emerge through some combined authorities in the summer. It's a call on the major corporates across the UK to adapt their existing approach in the exciting world of asset disposal. Most machines are crushed by corporates and recycled for their parts on incredible scales. So a typical corporate in London, for example, Deloitte, might churn through 8,000 machines in any 1 year, out of nothing more than that's been the norm that they've done for the last 10 years. It's become the done thing for IT directors. But the very same asset disposal firms that service them are equipped to restore devices for pretty much the same cost. So we'll be asking companies to pledge to restore and return them back to society first. Change very little in terms of their current practice, but be conscious of the enormous impact this could have on a family. On someone like Tony, extending the life of laptops is good for people, and because we're in Oxford and we're very green, it's also good for the planet. Finally, and most importantly, we're getting local. What has been most inspiring, and certainly the reason for the Reboot platform's existence, is the power of community. We're seeing the emergence of digital inclusion coalitions at a local level, driven to support people they know are left behind, marginalised, or furthest from a lot of other forms of support. Some of these existed before the pandemic, but now the range of actors and the strength of feeling and the involvement of existing community organisations is stronger than ever. So building on what we have is by far the best way forward. So I'm excited to be involved in that and excited to be part of the initiative that Adrian has mentioned. And I think that's a whistle-stop tour from me of the last 12 months of my life, Adrian.
Thank you, Chris. In the overall scheme of things, that's probably a more exciting life than many of us have had. Thank you so much for those thoughts, and I'm sure the chat box has been very lively through your talk, so I know you're able to stick around for the Q&A session at the end, which is fantastic. So we will pick up more with you then. Can I ask Sabiene from Be Free Young Carers to unmute yourself? Thank you for joining us today, Sabiene, and do you want to initially say who you are and introduce Be Free Young Carers?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Sabiene. I'm the fundraiser at Be Free Young Carers. We're a charity based in Harwell, Didcot, and we've been established for 27 years, and we support up to about 600 now. I think we're getting to 600 young carers throughout Oxfordshire, and we offer them respite activities. We offer them one-to-one emotional support. We offer a befriending service. We offer training, for example, like first aid training, nutrition advice, and we liaise with schools on how to identify young carers and support them through our support workers. I think Kate's got some photos there that I wouldn't mind sharing with you of what our normal year looks like. Obviously not last year, but this is when we were able to do our activities in person with our young carers, and they can be from going to a day at the beach or a trip to a theme park. So it's getting our young carers that are spending a lot of time of their downtime with the person they're caring for. So it's offering the respite activities for them. All our services this year have moved online. We're really excited in Easter time to be able to get out face to face in groups of 6 with our young carers. But obviously the pandemic has had a really huge impact on their lives with homeschooling. They're isolated anyway because they're a young carer. They don't tend to have the social activities that normal children have. So they spend a lot of time at home and not being able to go out. So that isolation has increased with lockdown and with the pandemic. So we've seen an increase of 2/3 of our young carers are reporting increased stress, increased anxiety, depression, and increased cases of self-harm due to the pandemic. So our support role has become even more paramount in these conditions. Yeah,
absolutely critical for very, very vulnerable set of people. And what's the lockdown and the pandemic taught you, and what you learnt about digital poverty and the impact that has on the families you're supporting?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really magnified the need. A lot of our young carer families didn't have access to laptops, for example, for their homeschooling. We got back. We had a team meeting in January, early January, just as the 3rd lockdown happened. Our young carers were still waiting 10 months into the pandemic for laptops so they could do their live lessons. These are young carers that were facing GCSEs this year, A-levels. The secondary schools tended not to have the access to the technology, whereas the primary schools had Chromebooks, but a lot of the primary schools could do printout work, where the live lessons were mainly happening with secondary schools. So we found our young families didn't necessarily have access to any laptops. I had one family that had 3 children, 2 secondary school age, 1 primary school age, that was using a smartphone between them all. So they all had to do their lessons from this smartphone at different times of the day. They just did not have that access. It's also, I mean, I don't know about you, Adrian, I've got children myself. I was looking around for a laptop for my kids to do homeschooling. And it's about the parents. The parents' laptops were going to be used for their work. So the children, weren't having their access there. It's also about the broadband width as well. If everyone's on a laptop, the internet connections, we've all had that in Zoom ourselves, I'm sure. So it really, really magnified the digital poverty that our young carers faced.
Yes, we've all experienced some or all of that to some degree, I'm sure, those of us with children. And I know, OCF gave you a grant at the start of lockdown 3. I'm really pleased to say, given what I said at the start, that it was one of the grants that we were only able to part fund, but were able to top up with monies from local philanthropists and donors. So it'd be just good to hear about what you were able to do with that money.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it came at such a critical time for us because as a small local charity, we were able to react really quickly and get a few reconditioned laptops out to our young carers. But like Christopher was saying, demand outstripped supply, and we were running out of laptops to give to our young carers. So the grant from OCF was really, really good. And it came at such a critical time and meant that I think we got it on the Friday. I was able to order laptops. They arrived on Monday. Our young carers could go to their lessons online on the Monday. And it really came at a critical time there. And it's also not necessarily just about the schoolwork they were doing, it's about the social connection. They're able to keep in contact with their friends and family members as well. I think Kate's got a video that I'd like to share with you, which shows all our young carers receiving the laptops. And it's great because, you know, it's something that belongs to them and they wouldn't have access to this without Oxfordshire Community Foundation. So huge thanks there.
I'm just looking for the video. I've got it open, but I can't see it on my screen share thing. So apologies. I tested this out earlier and it worked fine, and now I can't see it. So just bear with me a second. I'll see if I can
in the short pre-meeting that we could guarantee there would be digital problems at some point during this webinar, given the subject matter. Luckily, connectivity seems to have been okay so far, but
I'm so annoyed because I actually tested this earlier on, and now I can't find it.
If I can find it.
Yeah, that would be great. Otherwise we can, it's a lovely video as well. I'm really sorry. So we can send it also around to everyone at the end after the webinar.
Okay, I think I've got it. So I just need to, hold on, work out how I share my screen. So
if you go to screen share at the bottom, I've got the file open, but I can't see it on the screen share options. And you should be able to see a window that has it, and if you click share sound and optimize for video.
Okay, 2 seconds. You're testing my technology skills here.
Sorry, I said I would do this for you to help out. I'm sorry.
Screen, right, I've got that, and there we go. Can everyone see that? Yeah. Let me just press.
That's wonderful. You can almost see the transformative impact those laptops will have on some of those kids. So that's lovely to see. Thank you. And finally, Sabiene, what do you think communities can do to help support young carers, particularly those facing digital exclusion, as we hopefully come towards the end of this lockdown and look into the future?
Well, it's great to hear what Christopher's saying there. There's some really exciting initiatives going ahead there. It's lockdown and the pandemic has brought the community so much closer, and there's so much goodwill out there. Local businesses, like Christopher's saying, that just throw away their laptops at the end of the day. We're hoping to see more of that getting involved and recycling them. We've worked with quite large businesses like Sophos who have recycled their laptops and given us a selection. This has highlighted a huge area for us that we're thinking is not going to go away as the pandemic eases. There is a huge need for children that are moving from primary school to secondary school to actually get the technology. Laptops used to be a luxury, and that's proven it's not anymore. They're more of a necessity to young carers and young children as they're going to school. So we're working with different people like Sophos. We've also got the Raspberry Pi Foundation. I don't know if anyone knows much about Raspberry Pi, but it isn't a pie of raspberries. It is actually a computer, a mini computer that we've got that we've recently been successful in getting quite a few of that we're going to distribute to our young carers. So it's about every year we're going to look to see who's in need and who needs this technology to make sure that we support them that way. So it's a part of easing isolation and including them in society, and they are our most vulnerable children, so we need to look out for them.
Great. Well, thanks so much for sharing your time and thoughts in the work of Be Free Young Carers, and do stick around for the Q&A because I can see there's been more comments coming up as you've been speaking. For the final section, I'm actually going to hand over to two people to have a little conversation about getting Oxfordshire online. They will introduce themselves more fully, so I will pass you over to Olwen and Paddy.
Thanks, Adrian. So I'm Olwen Lintern-Smyth, and I'm the project manager looking after getting Oxfordshire online. I'm delighted to see so many of you here today and to be able to say a little bit about the project. I can't see Paddy on my screen at the moment, but I'm hoping he'll pop up when he starts to speak. So thank you so much for joining us today, Paddy. It would be great if you could start perhaps by telling us just a little bit about Our Common Good, who you are part of.
Absolutely, Olwen. Good afternoon, everybody. Olwen is slightly tempted just to stay quiet there for 10 seconds, just to give it. Oh, that would have been unfair. But hello, delighted to be here. Paddy Radcliffe, Director of Our Common Good. For those that don't know Our Common Good, we are a venture philanthropy fund founded by John Nixon, who some of you may know, who I know is on the call, and also Paul Donovan, who I'm sure a lot of you will know in his role as a director of OCF. As a venture philanthropy fund, we identify, assess, sometimes initiate projects and organisations that have the potential to make a real social impact by supporting them. That's two things. That's in effect provision of early stage funding, but also support on a one-to-one bespoke basis with strategy and organisational development. The sorts of projects that we look to support, like almost entirely likely to be innovative, community-based, high level of community involvement. So it's very much sort of building from the ground up rather than providing solutions from the top down or from the outside. It's a highly collaborative approach that we take, bringing together organisations across public, private and third sectors, because in our view, that's the best way to get to the best, most sustainable solutions. And through piloting these projects and developing some proof of concept at a local level, we hope very much to be able to then replicate them elsewhere, and through that to have an influence on best practice and policy at a national level. We were involved at the very, very early stages of Growing Minds, which some of you will know, I'm sure, helping to initiate and get that up and running, and that's developing well, and equally highly involved with Community Larders and Sophia that a number of you may know too.
Thanks, Paddy. That's brilliant. Thanks, Paddy. Obviously, we're really grateful that you have decided to focus on digital inclusion as a topic, because it's enabled this project to start, you know, your support for it and your funding for it. But why pick digital inclusion to focus on rather than any of the other issues that you could have chosen? Yeah,
I mean, there's an element, having had the previous two speakers of repeating the reasons, but I will do anyway, because they're important ones, and just to reinforce them as much as anything else. There's a bit of research that the Lloyds Bank did in 2018 that said that nearly 12 million people, which is 22% of the population, don't have the essential digital skills for everyday life. It's a pretty staggering statistic. So I think both Chris and Sabiene have mentioned, you know, this issue has been around for a while. There are real risks and downsides to not being able to get online, whether that's challenges with getting work, and then the types of roles that one can do in work. You might not have quite such a role that pays quite so much. So there's clearly an issue around potentially either no pay or lower pay, inability to access services, whether that's banking, making a doctor's appointment, or getting online for any sort of statutory services that might need to be able to access, impact on educational attainment, and potentially impact on communication, social isolation, and all the mental health, negative mental health aspects that lead on from that. So really, being online should almost be seen as a utility in the same way that water and heating are. It's so much a must-have rather than a nice-to-have. There's also an upside to getting people online. There is a clear business case. There's some statistics around, for every £1 invested in digital inclusion, you get a £15 return, whether that's through higher earnings, greater employability, being able to access shopping is cheaper online. There are communication benefits, time-saving benefits from doing things online rather than having to do them in person. So there's a massive economic upside to being online. So even before COVID, there was a necessity. What the pandemic has done has, as with so many things, has shone a bright light on the inequalities in this particular space. But it's also accelerated those inequalities because we've all been spending so much more time online. And that's a major societal structural shift that's not going to go away. So there's a very real risk that those that weren't online pre-pandemic are going to be left behind further faster unless we do something about it. So I think the reasons for getting involved with digital inclusion are pretty clear. There's a pressing need with lots of upsides, and we need to act quickly to address that need.
Absolutely. And with regard to this specific project or program or initiative, whatever we choose to call it, getting Oxfordshire online, I think collaboration perhaps is what we should refer to it as. What exactly do you think we should be aiming to achieve through this that perhaps hasn't been achieved yet across the county, and how will we know we've been successful with that?
So I think the first thing to say is that, and this has been touched on by others today already, is that there's been an awful lot of really exceptionally good response to the digital exclusion elements of the pandemic. Whether that's local organisations pulling together just to get laptops into the hands of people that need them. The little video that we just saw, you can see the difference that's been made there. And that's all really good work. I think our view is that as, fingers crossed, that the immediate issues and challenges of the pandemic recede and we return to something approaching what we might recognise as normality, that the issue of digital exclusion doesn't go away with the virus. And actually there is a risk that we think that some of these local, hyper-local small initiatives might fade away. And what we want to do with getting Oxfordshire online is create a sustainable, long-term, systemic solution to this particular challenge. And by sustainable and long-term, we're thinking a minimum of the next 3 to 5 years, and creating the system that's going to be able to address that challenge over that time period. So some key characteristics, I think, that we also want to consider are that this has to be universal. By universal, thinking in terms of it's all the age groups, all the socio-demographic groups that are currently excluded, so it's not selective. Clearly, I mean, Chris talked about the devices, data, connectivity and skills training and support aspects. We need to address those 3 pillars front and centre, and it needs to be ongoing. There are a certain number of people who will be digitally excluded currently. There will be more that will come on stream. As I say, it's a bit like filling a bucket with a hole that's got a hole in the bottom. We want to slowly fill in the hole and stop the water going into the top. Just some other aspects to touch on, Olwen, quickly. So, and again, this has been mentioned by other speakers, but this is very much not trying to reinvent a solution. There is lots of work that's been going on both within the county and elsewhere nationally. We want to build on that, engage with organisations to create this solution. This is not about reinventing the wheel. And as I mentioned about the overall our common good approach, is that if we can capture learning through the process within Oxfordshire and codify it in some way, shape or form, that it can then be useful elsewhere, we want to try and do that as well. But ultimately, this is about getting people digitally included. And if Oxfordshire can become 100% digitally included county, that's what success looks like. I think we need to be that ambitious. Anything less than that, we kind of think, well, how come we haven't achieved that ambition and that success? That ought to be our target, I think.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Paddy. I notice in the chat box we've got lots of mentions of some of the other projects that are going on. The Connect project is being highlighted there. We've talked about sustainable wantage earlier in the webinar. I can't see all the chats as we're going along, but do have a look in the chat boxes. I think that element of collaboration is really important, and as Paddy you just said, in terms of not reinventing what's there, but bringing it all together. It's about doing that. So I think, you know, we're nearly out of time with our conversation here, but I think that call to action would be getting people involved in terms of making contact with us, telling us about the work that they're doing, you know, as we said, as Adrian said at the beginning, making sure they're going onto the Oxford All In website to say about the activity that's already happening, but also contacting us. I think my contact details are on the OCF website, and I'd encourage people to get in touch with me, because we want to talk about this, we want to do stuff, not just talk about it, we want to do stuff on this to get things moving. And to do that, we all do need to work together, because together we can achieve that much more than the pockets of excellent activity that's been happening regionally across the county to date. So that's definitely the aspiration, and definitely agree with Paddy that we need to aim high on this. That, you know, even a few people still excluded is too many. So thank you so much for that, Paddy.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Olwen. Thank you, Paddy. Really interesting conversation, and I think everyone will look forward to hearing much more about the projects as things develop. Kate, you've been keeping a closer eye on the chat box than many of us, I hope. What are the comments and contributions to pick up from there?
Yeah, as Olwen mentioned, there's been a lot of mentions of the Connect project in Banbury, and I wonder if we could ask Pat to just tell us a bit more about that. So, in particular, your comment about providing training that helps people to be aware of sort of fraud and bullying, that kind of thing. I think that's quite an interesting aspect of this to pick up.
Safety and security is a huge concern as part of the project, so that would be great if you could.
Yep, I'm happy to quickly jump in there. So I'm from Citizens Advice, and actually we started helping people go online and engage advice online probably 2 years ago now. It feels like last year didn't happen, so I keep saying last year, but I mean the year before. And the reason we started doing this is because council tax went online, and universal credit, you know, if you claim benefits, you've got to go and manage your account online. And of course, a lot of people coming through our doors that we were supporting were really struggling with this. So we started a service at that stage, which was just training some volunteers who know about digital things to be able to help people go online, set up these accounts, point them in the right direction, but also to be safe online, because that was one of the things we were really worried about. And there's two issues around safety. The first safety is sort of the safety from, you know, viruses and scams and all of that sort of thing. But the other element of safety is about just doing things in a way that is sensible, because a lot of people don't realize, for example, that if you go online and you want to change your driver's license, the top 3 things that you'll probably encounter are services that will take you through the process and charge you 30 or 50 quid for your effort. And they've done nothing that you couldn't have done for free. And of course, when people are struggling financially, the last thing you want to do is to get them to go online and do something that's going to cost them money when it shouldn't cost them money at all. So we started doing this work already, and it was really linked to how we engage people into our advice services digitally, because historically people would come to us face to face, but there was this move towards digital, and we wanted to support people in that. But of course then COVID happened and all of that shut down, so we just got it going, and then we had to stop all of that because we couldn't be out in these public places like in libraries and so forth. But at the same time, we were working with the Age Friendly Banbury project to try and focus on how to make Banbury a place that older people felt safe going into and doing things in and so on. And of course COVID completely changed that. But we realized that being connected was very important. So as a multi-agency organized, grouping, we looked at how do we help predominantly older people, although it doesn't have to be limited to older people. How do we help people who are now socially isolated, who aren't going to be able to go into town because of the risk of COVID, who aren't going to be able to socialize with other people, to go online safely? And so this is where we transitioned what we were doing previously in public venues to adapting it so the volunteers can go to people's homes or meet them in places they feel comfortable in where they can access the internet. So, if somebody doesn't want someone coming into their home, they could sit in the garden or even go to the local park, so somewhere that's safe and legal under COVID restrictions, to help people do things with the devices they already have. That was the first part. And then the second part is about to help people get devices or go online. So there are a tremendous amount of people who have a smartphone. but all they use it for is making telephone calls. And what we want to do is not provide people with training that you would get if, you know, in a mainstream sort of way, but literally somebody might say, I want to be able to FaceTime, or I want to be able to interact with my son, daughter, whatever, that lives in Australia. So we can help them to set up a Facebook account, create the system for them, that they know you just go press on that button and it'll happen. So it was about trying to adapt what they already had to make it really simple for them to use without having to have a great understanding, or without having to figure out how things work and understand about downloading apps and all of that sort of thing. So it's really just about helping people with a sort of almost a least intervention. Once they become more confident and want to go and get more training or learn more about it, of course, that's when they can engage mainstream. But hopefully by that stage, they'll be online, they'll be safe online, and they will know where they can access that. So that goes beyond what we're looking to offer. So we're not a mainstream trainer. We're just about, let's get it going. You've got a device, you want to do a thing, let's make it happen without you having to understand how it happens. It just happens. The other part of the project is about recognizing that a lot of people don't have access to the internet, or they don't have devices. So it's not just about the pillars that were spoken about earlier, you know, about skills and about access to internet and about devices. So this is where we're looking to work with other agencies to get devices to people and to make sure that it's safe. Because again, if it's a donated device, you've got to make sure that it's been cleaned effectively and it's not, you know, going to have data on it, or introduce some sort of issue around access to somebody else's data. So that's what we're doing. We started as a group, it's a multi-agency group. So if you have a look at the link that was sent through, you'll see everyone that's involved. It's focused on Banbury, but of course that's just because we started it under that umbrella, and we really could roll this out, you know, across the whole county very easily. We would just need some capacity to do that.
Thank you.
I think that sums it up in a nutshell. If you have any questions, I'll answer them as well.
A really fantastic nutshell, and really good to hear about that work. And I see Thrive North Oxfordshire have posted, I know they've been doing some fantastic refurbishment work, and they're saying they have more supply than demand at the moment. So I fear you may be about to get your arms bitten off, but thank you for flagging that, Nikki. Kate, any other comments to pick up in the chat box?
Yes, there was a comment from Joanna Jones about getting Oxfordshire Online's engagement with local firms, a suggestion mentioning research machines, so local firms that work in education, and perhaps Olwen could pick that one up.
Yes, obviously we're very keen to work with any businesses who have got the kind of donations of devices to give us that Chris was mentioning. You know, a lot of devices at the moment are, you know, not repurposed in the way that they could be. So we're very keen to work with any businesses who can support with that. So again, it's about making contact. If people have a named individual there that you know, they can put me in contact with, that would be wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, there's been some very generous businesses particularly through lockdown 3, donating equipment and making donations to help local people. And we want to build on that goodwill and yeah, find ways of partnering in ways that work for businesses. As Chris said, you know, often for businesses, refurbishment is a very similar cost to destruction. So why would you not refurbish? Kate, maybe just one or two final comments or contributions.
Yeah, there's a few interesting comments about the census. So one saying that 20% of people couldn't access their census online and to request a paper copy, they had to go online to request one. And also commenting that perhaps the outcome of the census might provide interesting data on digital needs. Having just filled it in myself, I was just thinking, I didn't know whether the census asked about that. I can't remember. Perhaps our Simon might know the answer to that. I know he's looking forward to having that census data to look at. So that was just a couple of interesting comments. And then we've got another question about how do we get free data as well as devices, so that bringing in the aspect of data as well as the equipment.
Chris, do you want to pick up on data? You may know something on census as well, I don't know.
Yeah, I can only do another shameless plug, Adrian, for a campaign I've developed. I'll put it in the chat box in a minute, but it's called Click Zero. It's on the back of Zero rating the NHS during the pandemic. So a bit like a free post envelope or an 0800 number, there is no equivalent for on the internet. So at the moment, the recipient pays for the data to load the page. During the pandemic, we reversed that under exceptional circumstances, so that if you visited the NHS website, it was free and incurred no data cost. There's been a couple of emergency initiatives that have fallen into that as well. So the NHS COVID app is 0 rated, this unusual term. So I'm campaigning with a few others to 0 rate all essential public services. If we were successful in the future, that would mean that accessing the census data would be free, accessing universal credit would be free, and we wouldn't have to tackle this thorny issue that I mentioned before about the market at the moment has failed when it comes to supporting people who are in need of data. Having been left to the market, to the telcos and others, it will never really support the furthest first. So any schemes, as I mentioned before on the Data Poverty Lab, for me, they would be developed thinking about who's the furthest away, let's build it for them, and then other people will fall in. At the moment, you know, a BT basic broadband will maybe catch another few percent of the population who can afford it. A social tariff may do the same, but it remains the trickiest issue because there isn't a simple, sustainable solution that doesn't require philanthropy. And it means that where even we with the national emergency campaign, the Device.now campaign, we were giving away data that lasts for a year. That's not sustainable because what you've done is create a need or something that someone relies on that you then have to follow up. So we can get by, but we're looking at data sharing and data gifting. So there's been 165 million gigabytes unused on people's mobile phones during the pandemic. That data mountain has just gone back to the telcos. Wouldn't it be nice if instead at the end of the month you could donate the excess to a local charity? But we need to explore the technical aspects of that with the telcos. So data will remain a perennial problem where we'll need underwriting, we'll need philanthropy until we've got a sustainable solution in place, but it's not fixed yet.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for all your efforts on this front. And I think, just to stress again, we are incredibly lucky to have Nominet in Oxfordshire. So keen to be working in Oxfordshire by dint of many of them living here. So it's a good bonus for us. We do have to wind it up there. I don't know if Amanda is still with us, but thank you again to Amanda for your support through the year. And I hope, despite the challenges, it's been an interesting retrieval year for you. And we hope to be welcoming Monowar, the next High Sheriff, to the next webinar on the 28th of April, where we will be talking about reaching underrepresented communities. But just